Thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for being here, and good morning. As I was driving up here today, I was a little nervous about how the weather would shake out. I brought my umbrella and my rain jacket, but then I thought to myself, it wouldn't be summer in Montana without a little challenge from Mother Nature, right? There's an old adage, if you don't like the weather in Montana, stick around for 15 minutes. Before I begin my remarks, I want to go off script a little bit. Mr. White challenged us to think about when we were with the flag, or when the flag may have been with us. On 9/11, my wife and I were in Washington, D.C. We got up early in the morning and we drove to Gettysburg to take a tour of the battlefield. And while we were there, we learned about the terrorist attacks both in New York City and Washington, D.C. and we delayed our return to Washington, D.C. and eventually got there, and they had just opened up the George Washington Parkway. How many have been on the George Washington Parkway? We were the only car on the George Washington Parkway. It was very surrealistic. And of course, when we got into town, there were all sorts of law enforcement and military all over. But we were supposed to have a tour of, among other things, the White House the following day, and we just assumed it wasn't going to happen. And we slept in the next morning after watching all of the news reports of what had happened, and got a call in the morning asking if we still plan, or telling us we still needed to plan to be there because President Bush had said it's going to be business as usual. We're not going to let these people disrupt our lives. And so we were actually in the White House on 9/12, and when we left, we were handed by the staffers some little American flags. I wish I'd have thought of this, and I was told by the people I was with they'd never seen that happen before, and please keep those flags, and my wife and I still have those American flags. So it's great to see y'all braving the elements this morning to celebrate and honor our flag, one of the most powerful symbols that exists in mankind, recognized throughout the world as signifying honor, liberty, posterity, and most importantly, freedom. But our flag is more than just a symbol. It is a reminder of all who have fought and died for what it represents, and of all who serve to protect us here and abroad. Over the last 4.5 years, I've had the privilege and honor as Attorney General to work among some of the finest individuals in our state, our law enforcement professionals. Every day, the men and women who serve put on their uniforms not knowing exactly what dangers await them, but nonetheless, they selflessly put themselves in harm's way, all in the name of service to their communities. And if you were listening to the news today, you heard once again of law enforcement officers putting themselves in harm's way, but unfortunately, an active shooter shot at a baseball park at congressmen and staffers and others. It was the Capitol Police and the Alexandria Police who went to the danger while others were running away and prevented what could have been an even greater tragedy. In Montana, to have such strong support for law enforcement, when I travel around the state, I hear just how much Montanans from all walks of life appreciate and support those who serve us and keep us safe. They recognize the sacrifices that our officers make, and they recognize the risks they take. The support for law enforcement in this state is one of the countless examples of what makes Montana such a special place. Unfortunately, we occasionally experience in the most horrific way reminders of the dangers of the badge. Almost a month ago, Montana's law enforcement community experienced the worst kind of tragedy. One of our own had his life taken from him in cold blood. Broadwater County Sheriff's Deputy Mason Moore started his evening shift just like any other. But by approximately 3 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, in fact the Tuesday after Peace Officer Memorial Day, he lay dead, a victim of a senseless act of violence. When I received the phone call in the early hours of the morning informing me of what had happened, I was stunned. My heart skipped a beat and I stood for a moment petrified, overwhelmed with a flood of emotions. I felt anger towards those responsible, I felt a sense of apprehension for the other law enforcement officers in pursuit of the perpetrators. But most of all, I felt sorrow for Deputy Moore and his loved ones. And with each new horrific detail of the incident that was released, those emotions intensified. The hours that followed felt like an eternity, with lingering emotions plaguing my mind and stabbing at my heart. But I knew that while I was overcome with emotion, what I felt was nothing compared to what Deputy Moore's colleagues, friends, and family were experiencing. It's safe to say that May 16, 2017 was one of the most difficult days I've ever experienced as Attorney General. Just like the day when I got the news that Deputy Joe Dunn of the Cascade County Sheriff's Department was killed in the line of duty. But out of sorrow and anger, admiration and love was born. Words cannot adequately express my gratitude for the outpouring of love and support from Montanans to Deputy Moore's family, his law enforcement colleagues, his firefighter brothers and sisters, and his EMS colleagues. I was at a loss for words to express my gratitude for the hundreds of law enforcement officers, detention officers, dispatchers, firefighters, and other justice personnel and first responders who came from across America and Canada to show their love and support for Mason, his family and friends, and for his Broadwater County colleagues. Day to honor. But of course, it's not only our law enforcement who've made sacrifices for this country. It's impossible to adequately honor and respect our nation's veterans, as the sacrifices they have made for this country are far greater than most of us can imagine. I'd like to tell you the story of one individual who served his country bravely all the way to his death. Second Lieutenant Jack Lundberg. Jack was a B-17 bomber navigator in the U.S. Army Air Corps, now called the United States Air Force. On May 19, 1944, shortly before D-Day, thinking of what our nation's flag means to you, please remember the sacrifices of those who fought for it, and remember those who protect and serve to keep us safe at home. Remember what they gave and why they gave it. Remember why we all must fight to preserve the principles upon which this nation was founded, and remember the cost of freedom is no small price to pay. Indeed, freedom is never free, here or abroad. My Uncle Jack said it best: the USA is worth the sacrifice. May God continue to bless America, our flag, and each and every one of you. Thank you.